and then also cover some business having to do with our employees. Are there any other items that we need to have on the agenda? I'm skipping a little bit, but I'll get back.
Approval of the agenda as submitted.
Okay. So Mr. Nephew has made a motion, and Mr. Copen has seconded it to use the agenda that is before us tonight. Is there any further discussion necessary? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Ayes all. So we have to drop back now a little bit. We'll note for the roll that all council members are present and accounted for. And we have to say the Pledge of Allegiance. But normally before we say the pledge, I come up with something clever to say, and I don't have anything tonight. But I would like Mr. Nephew to tell us just a little bit about a special event that's come up for him, which will make it so he can't be at our next council meeting. But could you tell us just a little bit about that, John?
Well, put me on the spot, Mr. Mayor. So rather unexpectedly, I was invited to fill in for someone who was unable to do a training program with the National Democratic Institute, which is going to be taking place this weekend and later this week in Casablanca, Morocco. And it's going to be a training for actually local elected officials from Saudi Arabia. So our peers, as it were, from various cities in Saudi Arabia will be gathering to learn about how to represent their people. Democracy is kind of a new thing in Saudi Arabia, and apparently right now half of these local councils are appointed by the monarchy, and the other half of each council is actually elected by the people. So they're still finding their way around what this means and how to do it. And the topic I've been asked to talk about is dealing with the central authorities of government and things like lobbying and if nothing else, I can certainly have some horror stories of how we get treated by the monarchs of our other branches of government as they tell us what we have to do and don't give us any money to do it, for example. But it should be very interesting, and I regret that I'm probably not going to be back in time for the December 13th meeting, and if I am, I will be very, very jet-lagged. Yes, yeah, there will be interpreters. And no, there will be interpreters on site, and I actually just got some materials from Chief Lucan. One of the examples I'm going to use to talk about is the city and the fire department in particular did a really fantastic job pushing for the East Metro Fire Training Facility, and that's an example of a whole lot of different local governments working together. And also, up until the point where it got line item vetoed by the governor, working with our representatives at the state level to meet a regional need.
You know, that many local representatives in one place is in itself kind of a terroristic thought.
Well, and so to make the segue back to taxes is that the first thing I think I would tell the Saudis is you don't go to Morocco to do training sessions.
Right.
Well,
So-
they may have an issue of a lack of ability to freely speak their mind if they're on their home turf.
Well, that could be.
Which, speaking of our Pledge of Allegiance and our constitutional liberties and whatnot, that's certainly the ability to unfettered let your government know what you think is something we can take great pride in, as we'll see tonight.
And with that, then, taking great pride in our ability to speak, would join me in the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Now, I had mentioned it to some of the people who came earlier, and so I'll just mention it again, that there is a sign-up sheet in the back of the room, and so if you know that you're going to want to speak, and I'm talking about the portion of our meeting here, which is the public hearing having to do with taxes, that please sign up in the back, and then we will deal with you in the order that you signed up. So the first item that is on our agenda is a public hearing, and it doesn't say, but I assume it was called for 7 p.m. And so out of that discussion, which will involve a presentation by our staff, and then we'll open up the public hearing and hear from you, and then we'll follow that up with some discussion on the council's part, and we will end up then having a resolution that will certify our taxes payable in 2011 and a resolution that will adopt our budget for 2011. And so, with no further ado, Mr. All.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Tonight, you mentioned this is a public hearing. Required to adopt two resolutions on an amount to certify for taxes payable in 2011, and also a resolution adopting the entire budget document. Ms. Baumann, our finance manager, will go through a PowerPoint presentation that'll summarize the budget and the levy. And when she's concluded, I have some slides, some overhead slides that I want to review more as information, talking about this has been nearly a 7-month process that the council has been through, starting with the capital improvements plan, the review, but I want to summarize in believe it or not, 4 brief slides where we've gone, what we've done, and some of the reductions and changes that we have, and then the options that you have.
There's a sign outside the door that says no cell phones. You would think someone who would come to almost every meeting would read it once in a while.
Thank you, Mayor. So with no further ado, I guess I will turn it over to Ms. Baumann. She'll go through that presentation. I know both Gail and myself, council, are available for questions either during our presentations or at the conclusion. So with that, I'll turn it over to Gail.
Mayor and Council, I have a short presentation here. We've had multiple meetings since the budget process started last spring, so we've gone through a lot of these items already. I'm hoping to highlight on a couple maybe that we haven't touched on before, or just different things. Our budget goals, as we've stated before, are to maintain high quality and cost-effective public services, to address priorities set by the council, and to maintain a strong fiscal position. One of the things to remember with the strong fiscal position is cities receive the second half of their property tax payments in December each year. So even though it may look like cities have a very healthy fund balance at the end of the year, we need to remember that that money has to be used to get us through the first 5 to 6 months of the next year. So the state may always, you know, the state, you hear on this from the state sometimes that cities have all this money. We don't when you think about all the expenses that are coming up in the next months to get us through till our next tax payment comes in June or July. The budget has 3 sections. The biggest section is the operations section, which in 2011 is 65.5% of the total budget. Then we also have the capital improvement section, which is 6.7%, and the debt service section, which is 27.8%. The total expenditures in the 2011 proposed budget are $49.4 million. Now, there's a $4 million item in the debt service fund that is a payment on a called bond issue. In 2010, we issued refunding bonds. $4 million was set aside with a trust account, not the City of Maplewood, at a bank, that will be used to pay off the $4 million of bonds that are being called next year. So if we net that out of the total, we have a net budget of $45.4 million, which is 5.2% over the 2010 budget. I noted some of the, maybe some of the bigger items that are in the 2011 budget. One thing to note that is even if you took these projects out, you're not affecting, you wouldn't be able to reduce the tax levy. The 2011 tax levy is not going directly towards these projects except the legal contingency, because that is coming out of the general fund. So that's the only thing here that may affect the 2011 tax levy. The operations section is the biggest part of the budget. It is $32.4 million in the proposed budget, which is 2.2% more than the 2010 budget. The general fund is the biggest part of the operations budget. It's approximately $18 million, which is 55.7% of the operations budget. This is down from 2010, when it was, I believe, about 57%. A breakdown of the expenditures in the operations budget by department are listed here. The top 4, Public Works, Police, Community Development, and Parks, and fire are the biggest 4 departments in the operations budget. I have a pie chart illustrating the different expenditures in the operations budget by classification. As you can see, almost 60% is in personnel. I think the next biggest section is contractual, which is also fees for service for doing work for the city, which is 28.3%. Speaking of personnel, employees in the 2011 budget are down 1. The budget for 2010 was 163 full-time employees. It's dropping to 162 full-time employees. How this came about is there was a retirement in the community development department, and that full-time position was replaced with a part-time position. Major revenue sources in the operations budget. You may be surprised, property taxes is not the major revenue source. The biggest source of revenues comes from charges for services, which total approximately $15 million, or 46% of the budget. Property taxes is the next highest source at $13.2 million, which finances 40% of the operations budget. Other revenue sources include licenses, permits, state aid, fines, and interest earnings, and I think there's a few miscellaneous other things. Property tax revenue. Now, property tax revenue is approximately 43% of our total budget, not just the operations section. Property tax revenue, how it's broken up for 2011, we're estimating 74% of it goes to general fund operations, 23% will go to the debt service budget, and the remaining 3% will go to community center and rec programs. I also have a breakdown of how that additional 5% proposed tax levy increase is broken out between those 3 categories. One thing I need to note is last week I received from the state our actual max levy. My figures in the resolution are $94 off, so if the council decides to go with the 5%, that number in there will have to be decreased by $94. Just a note. I just received that last week, so I didn't have time to update things. Because the general fund is such a big part of the property tax revenue, I wanted to show the allocation of how the general fund expenditures are broken out by classification. As you can see, over 75% of the general fund expenditures are in personnel. So if you're looking at doing any kind of adjustment to property taxes, there's a very good possibility the change may have to come out of the personnel section of the general fund because it is the biggest part of the budget. This next slide shows the state, since 2008, has been withholding market value homestead credit from cities across the state of Minnesota. What this means is that we may levy a number, but we do not receive that number from residents. The state was liable for the balance of the property tax revenue. They have not been remitting that to cities. So even though we levy an amount, that's not what we're collecting in revenue, and the state is not forwarding the money to the cities. We have, with the estimate for 2011, we will have lost $1.9 million of revenue that the state was liable to the city for. Over that same 4-year period, our tax increase is 1.957. So over a 4-year period, our tax increases have basically just covered the amount of lost revenue that the state has withheld from the city. These next 2 slides is total property tax bill for residents, not just the city portion. And I apologize, yeah, you can't see this part of it. The first one shows residential property percentage change in total tax. 97% of the parcels in Maplewood in all 3 school districts are increasing 10% or less. And the next slide is dollar change in property tax, total tax, and about 57% of the total parcels in Maplewood are increasing $100 or less. That's total property tax, not just city. City is one part of the property tax bill. We also have school district, county, and any miscellaneous taxes that may be on your bill. The city tax capacity rate, with the proposed levy, the city tax capacity rate is increasing 9.94%. even with a 0% tax levy increase, the city tax rate would have increased